PowerPoint, which is really funny. Let's try that with the other one.
This is happening with the technology.
Well, it's just what happens when you have two PowerPoints up.
Yeah.
So now that's the one that I want you all to see. Hi, everyone. I'm Shauna van Blixen.
Hi, I'm Mia Skyten.
And we're so glad that you could join us today. I think there were 10 people in the participants list, and I think a few more will join. We're here to share with you about our audit experience. We're going to share the why and the how it happened. We're going to dive deep into what the auditor actually looked at in terms of employment costs, travel costs, experts, conferences, and other costs.
And we're going to share about our learnings. We learned a lot during this audit.
Indeed, we did. And maybe you have learned other things through your own work with projects. So this is a disclaimer in the beginning that your mileage may vary. Your grant agreement may be different, your guide for applicants. There's a lot of general principles within EU projects that seem to be the same, or at least very similar. I actually have a friend who works with EU projects for a technical university where they're building robots. And so we're constantly writing each other about, well, how are you fixing this? And what are you doing here? So there are similarities, but there are absolutely differences. So check your own documents before you take our word as the final word. And share your own experience in the chat too, please.
Yeah, and feel free to chat while we speak. We can see your chat, and we will try to answer as quick as we can.
Here you go.
So, what the EU auditors are tasked to do when they do, well, they do an on-the-spot check. That is what they call it. And they want to verify the costs under the project. They want to check they checked CBSS as an organization, how it functions, our capacity, our policies and procedures. And they are also tasked to report their findings to the Commission and partners in the project.
But why did they do this, Mia? Why did they come here?
Well, the why is that they do a recalculation of the final grant. I'm so sorry, but they do. Any errors or missing evidence is ground for partial or complete cancellation of the cost. They actually picked a sample of what they wanted to check, and the audit itself verified 73% of our costs in the project.
And this was for Promise One.
Promise One. So Promise One was, or let's put it like this, 75% of the sample in the spot check was staff costs. So this is where me and Shauna and the auditors spend most of our time. And we had 5 co-partners in the project, and the co-partners only had staff costs in the budget. Our organization had both staff costs and all other direct costs.
And I would say this made it somewhat easier to be able to do the reporting and do the audit on the project, because we had the bulk of the costs already here in our own accounting systems.
Yeah, but they selected in advance which costs they would focus on. We were requested to send them the ledger, and they did a sample. They picked lines and did not expand much beyond this. Fortunately,
they could have if they wanted to, and yes. They explained this in the process. So We were alerted by letter about 2 months prior, both letter and email, actually. And then we got a questionnaire about 1 month prior with, it had a bit of a dual purpose, I would say. It was so that both us, the lead partner at the Council of the Baltic Sea States, and our partners had enough time to answer some key questions, but it also helped in a way to guide our own preparations for the audit, what sorts of documentation we needed to have in order in advance. And then the
May I say something
sure.
in connection with the questionnaire? It was, as I remember it was 126 questions.
Actually, it didn't calculate the numbers correctly. It was more like 132 questions.
Okay.
Yeah. It was extensive. And the partners needed to fill it out in as much detail as the lead partner needed to as well. About 2 weeks before they showed up, we got the sample that Mia had been talking about. And in this sample, they asked us line by line about the taxi usage to justify it. They asked us about staff costs when, for example, if someone was only supposed to have, 30 days and they ended up having 130 days, explaining why this happened. They wanted to see the staff calculation sheets for the 11 people that they selected in the sample, and they wanted to see all of the documentation for these 11 employment costs, the employment costs for 11 people in the sample, 15 receipts in the travel and subsistence category, and 17 receipts in the other E category. And then they came to Stockholm. It was someone from Brussels who came from Ernst & Young as audit leader. And they also had someone from Ernst & Young here in Stockholm.
And both of them spoke fluent Swedish. So my guess is that they always adopt to the local language where they do the audit.
It was a great benefit for you, I think.
Well, when it came to details, because there were no misunderstandings in the details. If I had a question, I could simply ask them in Swedish. So I had an exact answer in my own language.
Yeah. So when they came, we had an opening meeting where they told us about what they're going to do and thanking us for our cooperation. The audit itself, as we said, focused on the sample, but they did look at other things too. And they said that they would expand if they found something systematic. I don't think that they found anything systematic. They were asking during the audit all the time for invoices, proof of payment, procurement, exchange rate, and other explanations for things. Day one, I would say, was a little bit of a slow start. The auditor from Brussels, I think, had to give some instructions to the auditor from Stockholm, for example, but they were also just getting into the quite massive amount of documents that we had. And they started by focusing on the partner costs because the partners aren't here, so it takes more time to get answers from them if we have to ask them questions. Day two was many more questions than they started on CBSS costs. Day three was basically all CBSS questions. And I should say that we were busy the whole time that they were here with the audit. So don't schedule anything else. And if you have people in your office, or if you have colleagues who think that, this is going to be a walk in the park, you're going to have 30 minutes to go to a meeting, you probably won't. So don't feel crazy by saying that you won't have enough time. It is
every minute is of value.
Absolutely. Right. And then day four was the home stretch. And something that we need to emphasize here is that at the closing meeting at the day four there, no more documentation. They don't have to accept any more documentation from you. Depending on who your auditor is and the process that they have in place, they may be a bit flexible, especially for extenuating circumstances, which we actually did have one case of this. And this is why time is really of the essence.
So, our duties during the audit. Well, we were 2 people. We were Shauna, project manager, and I, as a financial controller. We were the main contacts, and we were the team. So my advice to you is to form a team, because you don't want to be on your own in this, because it's so horrible. So you have to have someone who you can, well, laugh with.
You know what I want to laugh about right now, actually? Remember the time that we got the sample and you were like, yeah, but I can just do this in a day.
Yeah. Well, what we worked with was to answer the questions: why, who, how, where is the evidence. And we had to track down all additional documentation and proof. We had a lot. This project was well documented from the beginning, but we didn't really realize on what level it was supposed to be done at an audit. And of course, we spent a lot of time to send requests to the partners, call them, email them, and most of all, help them with the questions, because the questionnaire in itself was a bit complicated. And we spent a lot of time
Absolutely
working with the co-partners and trying to help them.
We even visited them.
Yeah.
The ones who sit,
Oh, yeah.
across the way here.
And you're always in a hurry, so time is of essence. Plan in advance, and don't have you can't have any other engagements on the side, really. It sounds simple, but you have to be aware of that. You have to remember tiny details from like 2 to 4 years ago. Shauna was at some point, you were told to point out certain people in photographs, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I did this in my preparation, actually. Like, I have the signature sheet, and maybe somebody didn't sign it because it's a big conference, and sometimes it happens. So then
and conferences can take place for several days, and they might only have signed the first day.
Or sometimes you have a high-level speaker who's super busy talking with everybody and somehow never passes past the signature sheet. So, I got out all of the photos and started circling people's faces and labeling them.
And can you find the email from one time that you made the decision, or
if you were even in the email?
Yeah. Could be other people, like co-partners or other external experts who make decisions on what restaurant to visit or so forth. And can you get in contact with them? Are they still working at all?
Yeah, a question that came up a number of times when we were preparing this audit is, but Shauna, what would we do if you weren't here? You know everything about the project.
Oh, well, we were lucky.
Yeah. So what evidence were they looking for, Mia? This is a bit of a summary of all of the things that we're going to go deeper into detail here.
The staff costs were essential, and they checked that they were calculated exactly the right way. So
we'll get more into detail about that.
We will get into more detail about that. That all tasks were carried out. For instance, let's say an expert who sends an invoice on something with their timesheets, they even wanted to check the output, that the things, the tasks they were supposed to do, that they were actually done.
Yeah, I had to actually get interview protocols for people from our researcher. Yeah.
Hotels, catering experts, when you do procurements, that you follow the EU rules and your own internal procurement rules. verbal agreements, well, can be okay, but you have to really show them that you did some type of investigation about best value for money.
So if you made a bunch of phone calls, you made a list of who you called and the price and the notes.
Keep a list somewhere. About travel, so you need to make sure that you can prove that they actually have traveled and that they actually participated in the conferences. So that is the photos and all of that. And that all of the costs booked in the project are related to the project. Each cost is booked on the right budget heading, A, B, E, etc. And on the basis on a final invoices, we will come to that too, no preliminary invoices. Any taxi taken, well, it has to have a clear and acceptable reason, and you have to take notes during the project, so you know. And well, redistribution of staff time was well reasoned and more. And I can also mention that you have to be very careful with the audit trail. All costs have to have a clear audit trail, a voucher number in the ledger, basically.
In terms of what they looked at with the CBSS on the whole as the organization, I would say that they don't really have the mandate to do an audit of our organization, but they kind of did in a way. They looked at our proof of contributions. So we're an organization where we get annually we get contributions from the governments of our member states. So they actually looked at the proof that we actually got that money. And they looked at the policies, for example, travel, procurement, and pension. In that case, I think it was not so much checking that the CBSS as an organization is, not operating fraudulently or something. In that case, I think there's a number of places in the grant agreement where it defaults to your own policies.
So they took a close look at our own internal guidelines for like approval of external invoices, approval of costs, and so forth.
And they might have looked at some other documents, but we had everything in good order. So there was no other questions that came up here for us. I can also say that they can also look into if there were overlapping projects, making sure that a cost really belongs to one project and not the other. I don't think we had any issues with this come up though during the audit. And on the project on the whole, they do look at the co-financing agreement that we had with the partners. I think in current projects, we now have the obligation to have consortium agreements, so I think they'll be looking into that. They looked at the exchange rate approach, and for that, we actually did get some comments about how the CBSS is doing this, which we're looking into, and they might have been looking at some other things as well. So, but let's get into the biggie, the employment costs.
The fun part.
The fun stuff. Tell us.
Okay, this is what takes most of the time, because they do a full recalculation based on every single individual tiny factor. And the lead partner have the responsibility to check and correct every tiny detail reported by co-partners.
And actually, when we first got the audit, I had decided, like, let's not even go there. I would prefer that the CBSS is not responsible for any money that the partners then have to pay back. They should have full responsibility over the numbers that we are submitting to the auditors on their behalf.
So the situation at the audit was that some co-partners did the staff cost calculation sheet. Some partners used flat rates or percentages or whatever. So when they actually came, we realized that all of the staff cost calculations had to be redone. We had to recalculate them because, well, we have to be honest about this. We learned during the audit exactly how the calculations was supposed to be done. So on the 4 days of audit, we spent a lot of time calculating
Yes.
co-partner staff costs.
And I would say even here that, you know, we could have probably, if we could roll back time and do the staff calculation sheets for the partners on their behalf, how do you think that would have gone for us?
Well, it was of no use at that point because I think we didn't know exactly how it was calculated. To be honest,
the audit was training for us.
Yeah, so now we know.
Now we know.
And of course, one challenge during this recalculation thing was that most of the co-partners had documentation in other languages than English. So we didn't understand the languages for the payslips, for the proof of payment, or other documentation of pensions.
Gosh, for some partners,
insurances.
For some partners, we even needed to get the collective agreement that they have, and then dive into the details of what does this one mean.
Yeah, in Romanian or
Dutch.
So it's a bit tricky, but we will come to the details.
One thing I should say here, kind of a really important detail with the whole year part of this.
Yeah.
The recalculation is based on the whole calendar year, and it doesn't matter when your financial year is. If you have the July to June financial year, it doesn't matter if your project starts in April and ends 2 years later in March. You have to have the months before April, and you have to have all of the months after that March in that final year.
Yeah, and in Promise, I think it started in October.
Yeah.
So all of our staff costs was from October that year. So we had to do a recalculation based on the whole year and collect all the pay slips and proof of payment and everything for the whole calendar year. So this is super important. But I would and then we discovered an interesting fact that if the project, in this case, the project ended in, what month did it end? Was it December? I think we're lucky.
Did we? No, we actually ended in October. We didn't even get an extension.
No, okay. So if a project ends,
but then we had 2 months to report, and that's why.
Yeah. But if you have, I don't know, if you have worked with the staff cost calculation sheet, you will discover that you will not end up on an exact hourly rate until the whole calendar year is completed. So one question that popped up was, how do we do when the project ends in October, right? Because you don't know what is going to happen in November, December. We can't claim any hours, but the rate actually changes if you're sick or if you're on vacation and blah, blah, blah. So we asked the auditor about this, and she said, do your best. Fill in the whole calendar year, and we will recalculate it when we come to do an audit. So that's the answer.
There is another option beyond the employment cost spreadsheet, which is the slide that we have here right now. Maybe you're all familiar with it. The other option that she gave us is this option number 2. Tell us more about this.
This is actually about doing the calculation yourself. The staff cost calculation sheet is super smart, but you can do it by yourself. I call it alternative 2. And in alternative 2, And this is only if you don't want to use the staff cost calculation. The alternative to is to establish the annual productive days or hours. So you have to do this by calendar year, calculate the annual productive hours
Per person,
based
on actual sick leave, holiday.
actual numbers. And if you go to the next slide, in combination with the annual gross salary, right? So you calculate the annual hours, the annual gross salary, and then you can calculate the hourly rate in the project. But I advise you to use the staff cost calculation, because this is, I think it's much more of a work to do. The staff cost calculation do it for you.
Yeah, and even if you do use this brilliant template, you've got to be super careful about what you actually calculate as being part of the staff costs. I know that we had a lot of questions, like I said, about if it's included in the collective agreement, can it be included in the employment cost calculation spreadsheet, for example. So tell us a little bit more about the very specific things that we learned with that.
Well, I had to do some staff cost calculations during these 4 days, and my experience is that it's a lot of trouble to work through 12 pay slips for each year. You might have a project with 3 years, and there are 12 months each year, and you could have several employees in every organization. So the quickest way to do it was to have accumulated payroll. And the auditors accepted the accumulated payroll, and with the possibility to present pay slips if they asked. So my impression was that accumulated payroll was okay. So you only have one document for the whole year. Insurances, all insurances shall be in line with the any collective agreement in the country. We had sickness and health insurances that we added in our own calculations at CBSS, but they were considered not eligible. Pensions are eligible if they're collective.
If they apply to everybody.
Yes, they have to apply to everybody at the organization, no individual pensions. And of course, the regulated hours per working day is always a factor. So.
Yeah, it's really good if in this calculation spreadsheet you actually note that. They should have a box for it. I don't think that they do though. But because when you divide the hours, it can be very different if you have a 7.5 hour day or an 8 hour day.
Yeah.
We had a couple of other funny things here with you have 2 directors in a company, it might be considered and they're both on the project, it might be considered a conflict of interest. Special employment type, even if you have employed only on the project, but you have multiple project contracts in the same company, they care about the total amount of time that you worked at the company. Here too, I think it has to do with making sure that you're not getting double pay for, and if we had a situation where we had a partner who they don't have supervisors. So they didn't, and they were really going with the letter of the law that's written in the grant agreement, and it says, have your supervisor sign your timesheets. So they didn't have anyone sign their timesheets.
Well, a quickie about timesheets. They all have to be signed somewhere. Yeah. As you said, signed by 2 people. So
doesn't have to be your supervisor.
No, but print them and sign them and rescan them, because if you don't have the signatures, you're done.
Yeah.
Or if you use electronic time collecting software or something, you will have the digital digital approval. But if you use paper copies, have the signatures.
Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to partner employment costs, it is in as much detail as what we just described. Even if they are only going to the lead partner to do the audit, they're looking in the partner employment costs in as much detail as they're looking at in that partner that they're actually visiting the offices of. And translations, we mentioned earlier, it's really a challenge. So it's great if you have, for example, a sample from each of your partners. And you as a partner yourself, you can already do this. Send a sample of all of your documents with just a handwritten note somewhere about what all of the little things mean as reference. And just to say that this is a lot harder to do because you know, there's such a tiny amount of time. The partners are not here. They might not even be just down the street like one of them was. They might not really have any experience with an EU project. They might be part of, you know, like a teeny tiny organization or a teeny tiny unit in a huge organization, and they don't really have a direct line to who has access to the documents that we're even asking for.
Or it can be a public holiday in that country.
For like a week.
For a week for that audit.
This was our extenuating circumstance, by the way. So, yeah. And then what did they look at when it comes to travel costs? They double checked that everyone who stayed in a hotel room paid for by the project also signed the attendance sheet. If not, like we mentioned earlier, I was able to show photos, and we also were able, in this case, to show emails about their attendance. Like if they emailed afterwards saying, thank you so much for having me, can you send me that presentation? Or even emails before, like confirming, can you send me my ticket? You know, these kinds of things. I also used dinner sign-up sheets. And we, at this time, were still doing evaluation forms that had name and signature. So all these little opportunities gave me one more chance to find somebody's signature to prove that they were there. So when we were preparing the audit, a lot of the heavy lifting that I was doing was literally putting all of this stuff in order so that there was no questions about this. There still were a couple of questions. But it was really very easy for the auditors to verify everything. Boarding passes. We had boarding passes from almost everybody, but not in both directions.
Yeah, but it was accepted that we had one boarding pass.
It was, but the impression I got is that this depends on the auditor. And I would say the same thing of photos and emails beyond the signature sheet. It seems to me that that would depend on how kind your auditor is to you. They also looked at expensive trips. They asked us to justify why an expensive trip is happening. One of them being from Malta to Iceland. It's expensive. And my comment was, Malta is part of the EU, and we were going to Iceland because that's where Barnahus was born. So this was our option. They also looked at route of travel. So some of our travel agency invoices had kind of funny calculations that, you know, had someone traveling through Paris to go somewhere, but we had to show the full itinerary to show that they actually did go somewhere, or if they flew through a random city, that it was just a layover for a short time. This actually reminds me, sometimes very rarely, I have people ask me if I can book a flight for them from their hometown to like for a city weekend and then onwards to our conference. I'm like, no, I can't pay for your flight for you to have a city weekend and then come. I can pay for you to come to our conference, and that's it. Just to put that out there in case any of you also get these kinds of questions that come to you. Other learnings about travel costs: no-shows on flights or hotels, it's considered not related to the project, and it should be covered by overhead. Keep a record of the reason. Sometimes people die. That's literally what the auditor said. I thought it was really funny. I hope you're laughing over there. It does happen though. So I think in some extenuating circumstances, they would consider it as belonging part of the project. But we, in this case, actually had a head of unit in a ministry from Poland who at the last minute couldn't come. It happens a lot on the director level in these big organizations in the government. And he did not give me a reason. I did not feel that I had a place to ask for a reason from his secretary. And so she said it was not accepted. So there you go. Yeah, signatures. We did one signature sheet per meeting, not per day, but I think that's probably, it's just something that I didn't think of at the time. You should probably have a signature sheet every single day. Another time. Taxis, multiple people leaving very late or very early. If it was cheaper than public transportation, it is okay, or at least it was accepted in this audit. And we paid a preliminary invoice on one of our hotels, and we didn't get the final invoice.
That's pretty common that you get pro forma invoices from hotel because they want to be paid in advance.
Yeah. Or a venue, for example.
Yeah. Make sure that you have the final invoice.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's considered
regrets.
not valid.
Okay, so what did they look at with experts? So on one of our invoices, someone had the number of days that they worked, and then they had their rate, and then when you multiplied it, he put a different number. I think it was just a mistake. It was a slightly bigger number than the day times rate amount. So I think we overpaid him like 50 euros or something. But they checked that, and then it was decided as being ineligible, of course. For procurement proof on experts, they asked to see the emails where they were invited and how they agreed to join the project as experts. And also, of course, our decision notes about these things. And we already mentioned that they actually looked at the timesheets and asked for evidence that they actually did the work that they wrote on their timesheets. And then when it comes to conferences, yeah, again, with the pro forma invoice thing, we had a spirited discussion about if catering is under travel and subsistence or other direct costs. And don't freak out. I think we came to an agreement here. So when it's part of a venue cost, for example, if you're renting a venue and you're getting catering booked as part of that, and you have procurement for all of this, then you're good. The question came up of when you go to a restaurant. So for example, here in our office, we have a really nice conference room, and we can have lunch here, but sometimes it's nice to just go to a restaurant nearby. And when we do that, I actually do a procurement, or at least I have a recent procurement on file. And it's like this in many other times that we have conferences or meetings somewhere else, that it's nice to go down the street to a restaurant and we have evidence that we actually compared prices and made a decision. And yeah, that was the discussion. She wanted to say that anything at a restaurant should go on travel and subsistence. And I wanted to say I did a procurement, so it goes on E, because that's where we budgeted it for. And that was my main question to her. How should I budget for a big conference if I don't, like, it's a huge amount of people, or even a medium amount of people. If you have a project that has a ton of meetings involved and a lot of catering, it's gonna be a big imbalance if all of a sudden you've booked everything, you've budgeted everything on E, and then you didn't realize you're going to go to restaurants and suddenly it all needs to be on B. So it was okay in this case, but it was unclear for about a half a day. Yeah. And other direct costs, subscription-based services. They wanted to prorate the subscription-based services to the duration of the project only. So that applied to like web hosting, for example. And we had gotten webinar software for one webinar, and they asked us a lot of questions about, like, seriously, we paid 1 month. We paid 125 euros or something like this for 1 month. And I swear I got more questions on this one invoice than anything else in the whole audit. And they even made me show procurement proof. And I was going through my emails trying to find, like, gosh, I must have sent an email to somebody saying, I'm looking at these options, I think we should choose this one. But I must have drafted that email and then realized nobody cares but me. So I never sent it, but I did still have in my Google search history evidence that I did Google searches for webinar software and comparing and which one's the best and which one's a good value. So I took a screenshot of that and it was accepted. So hot tip for all of you, don't clear your Google search history. It might come in very valuable. So that's all of the A's through E's. We have some other things to say about general learnings about the project. So first one.
We learned a lot. We learned a lot.
Clearly.
As Shauna mentioned earlier, it was useful to print important emails which show the decision-making process, right? They might not answer all questions, but it's a good start. Why did you travel 1 day in advance? Or
I had a bunch of emails like that where, you know, someone traveling from a long distance, it's actually cheaper, and I actually kept a record of approximately how much money is saved. That it's cheaper for them to stay 1 more day in a hotel. I had all of those just in a binder, waiting for this moment to shine.
And why did we do certain details different from how it was described in the project description? Well, emails, conversations, and so forth.
Exactly. And then in terms of for reporting, the best value for money, we already covered this a little bit, but the procurement rules default to your policies of your organization beyond the best value for money policy in your grant agreement. So, but regardless of whatever your policy is, you still have to have evidence.
Keep the evidence.
Google search history. Hopefully it's not your first resort.
Yeah, and then of course we are all humans, right? We can put stuff in the wrong budget heading, A, B, E, and so forth.
We had a few of these actually.
Yeah. But to be aware of that such a mistake can trigger a recalculation of the grant.
Yeah, we'll get a little bit more into that in another slide. For us, having a parallel binder system was really helpful. And there's probably a great digital way to do it. I'm not aware of it. Let me know if you know. I'd love to use it. We've been toying actually with the idea of uploading some of these things into our into Fort Knox, our accounting system, as an option to keep it all into one place.
We have the possibility to upload supporting documents, but
I might do this in Promise too.
Yeah, but it's also manual work that has to be done. You have to go to the scanner and push the button, and someone has to understand that we need these attachments and so forth.
Have to sit there and you have to do that with a binder anyway.
So if you have some tips, please let us know. We did this all manual. We had binders in bookshelves or tables, and we did copies, and
it was super helpful to be able to have it all physically, actually, because I could find anything at a drop of a hat by the time 2 months had passed. We had the copies of the invoices, the proof of payment, we had the procurement, we had the original signed contracts, we had the boarding passes connected to the original invoices, we had the samples of all products, we had all the meeting documentation, and it was sort of spaced out in the binders approximately where the costs started. it was all very like sort of organized within organization kind of a system. Make sure that you've got signatures on everything that needs to have signatures on it. Maybe, you know, sometimes things go through that don't get a signature. You've got one more shot.
But learning was also that the sample itself, it seemed to target big costs, right? Costs that might be reckless spending. We didn't have any reckless spending, but anyways.
Well, that trip from Malta to Iceland.
Okay.
I think there's a reason why they pulled that out of the hat.
So they chose the big ones, and they also looked at the costs towards the very end of the project, or just random samples of different type of expenses. So it is actually possible to do like a practice audit on yourself. Just print the ledger and pick some samples and see what you have.
I actually have developed a sample protocol here for you to do like a spot check on yourself or a spot check on one of your partners. If anyone's interested, let me know. I can put your email, or I can put my email here and I can send it to you. Keep going.
Well, okay. Okay, emailing hotels. This is about the pro forma thing.
Yeah, or even, you know, I didn't have some boarding passes for some people. So I actually emailed or used the customer service sites for some of the airlines, asking if I could get proof of flights for some people. And some of the airlines sent it right away because, you know, I'm the one who paid for the flight, so they should send it. And some, like Lufthansa, they didn't want to do that.
So this is more about if you're actually in the audit or preparing for the audit.
Preparing for the audit.
And you can see that some documentation is missing. There are ways of finding it.
Being proactive there. I was doing this before we even got the sample as part of organizing all of those things in the parallel binder system. I put sticky notes everywhere where there was something that was missing with a note about what's missing, and I just started going one by one.
So it was a lot of work, and we would probably hire external help if we
just to help with that heavy lifting. Yeah, it was
with all the manual work.
Yeah, because it was a lot of hours. In total, more than 300 total hours for CBSS staff. That's mostly us, but it was a couple of other people now and then as well, helping with a little bit of documents.
Yeah, and this was already a well-documented project with a well-informed project manager still on staff. And
we were still super busy. This is also a project where we only had 5 partners, not the 12 that we have in Promise 2. And a good chunk of this organization could have actually been done during the project. But it's an investment.
Yeah, you learn as you go.
Yeah. So results. We don't actually have the final bill yet because this takes so long. I checked in with the auditor a couple weeks ago and she said that it's with the EU. So we'll see when we get that. I guess it will be next year. So it's from beginning to end, it seems like nearly a year anyway, because we were alerted March, February.
Oh,
we were alerted in February, I think.
Okay.
Even. Yeah. So when I was thinking about what the different kinds of scenarios would be, and maybe you'll recognize yourself or your own organization in some of these scenarios, hopefully not the first one, the dumpster fire one. Basically, if you don't do any documentation, or you only have partial documentation for everything, and you didn't make an attempt to prepare before the auditors came, then it would probably have been a 91% penalty, just based on the documents that I think you could have ready. It would probably be a 91% penalty on the EU contribution that they gave you for the project. And at that point, I think they would just take the whole thing because obviously there was a systematic error, right? Survival mode.
avoid systematic errors.
Yeah. So, and then I would say survival mode is probably very common for organizations that are new to projects, or even if they have quite a lot of experience. You have a lot of partial and missing documentation. You maybe have a lot of travel and participation proof missing. Maybe you don't really have so much procurement proof available, and you ran out of time to come up with additional evidence. But you were able to get your employment costs more or less in order, but your partners were not able to. Then it probably would have been about 60% paying back what the EU gave you.
And I would say that we were in survival with the co-partners
Yeah.
when we were alerted, but we managed to fix it.
And on the other stuff, we were more in the, we got this far. So if we didn't do any more or very low preparation between what I did at the end of the project during the reporting period, before the audit came, and then, you know, just assuming that we ran out of time to get additional evidence, then it would have been a 33% payback. The auditor hates you. If the auditor wants to be very strict about rules that may or may not be actually written in any document, it would be 25%. And our auditor said in our closing meeting,
it's not a disaster. And we was like,
yay. So our results is we're going to be paying back about 7% of the EU contribution that was found to be ineligible, which is not, you know, the happiest number.
No,
but
it was mostly staff costs, technicalities, right? And it was co-partner technicalities.
And a preliminary invoice.
Yeah. A preliminary invoice, and that was a big one.
Yeah.
But we had the final, and the final invoice have been sent to them. So hope they accept.
You know, we also had one instance with one of the partners where their organization actually split from another organization, so they couldn't provide any employment costs before that year. I hope they pick up on that and give us a pass, because that would be very nice to that partner. Let's see. We also had 2 hotel no-shows and that one invoice that I said that was miscalculated. So some important things to know about the final recalculation. It will depend on some moving parts. So for example, we had some travel costs that were booked on E and not B. So they were not found to be ineligible, but they were recalculated as B. And if you have enough of these, if you have many of these that are big, you might hit the threshold. Thank you. Because at least in this project, you could transfer 20% maximum between budgets. Other projects have much lower thresholds than that. It also has to do with the 7% overhead. So the 7% overhead, of course, gets recalculated because your whole grant is recalculated. Yeah. You do have a contradictory procedure.
Yes. So we are in that procedure, right?
Yeah, it's not done yet.
No, it's not done yet. We had a written final, what did they call it? Findings report.
Yeah.
And we had a possibility to, and we did answer in writing back our comments on the findings, and that's where we are.
That's where we are. Another threshold that, you know, could matter is this maximum for subcontracting. It could be affected in the recalculation, and they also may find other things between the closing meeting and the final report. So some final thoughts from us. What would we have done differently based on what we knew before? Maybe not so much.
Not so much, I guess.
Maybe push for hiring a consultant to do this heavy lifting for the prep. But now, what would we do?
I don't know. Yeah. You mean if we had known then what we know now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would have been much more careful with the staff costs, because the staff costs is such a big chunk of the whole thing. So well, we are careful with staff costs nowadays. And we are much more detailed in the documentation too.
Yeah.
I never forget the boarding pass anymore. No.
We also, in our coming project, we just got word that we will be getting Promise 3, which is really exciting, but it's also a lot more money. And yeah, so there's a really big responsibility there to make sure that we get the documentation right from the beginning. So we're actually budgeting in more support staff so that we can have it a little bit more systematically
That's
organized.
a valuable learning. You need to have need to have the resources to
something
no, I don't know.
I know you're tired. It's something that I've been trying to get our partners to do as well when we're budgeting in a project, is to actually put in an admin person, but they always say, no, but we don't need that. I think they have regrets in the end. It would be much better if they did, because then we also have a direct line to an admin person who can actually help us, right?
In Promise 3.
Yeah.
Yes, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
If they come and audit Promise 3, we will.
We'll be ready to go. However, this is a great transition into the end of this webinar. There is no guarantee that this is the last audit of Promise 1, because the auditor happened to mention that we should keep all of this extra documentation
in case someone else comes. That was a bit of a laugh. I think I was just quiet. I didn't know what to say.
No.
But
so I hope that you all got something new out of that. If you have questions or thoughts, you've got my email on the screen. Let me know.
Yeah, thank you.
If a question pops up after this webinar, please email us or call us, and we will take it from that.
Especially our project partners.
Yeah.
I was listening to you. It was a very energetic, I would say, webinar, and I would just want to say congratulations for surviving this. And I was just feeling like what a huge respect I have for project managers, financial managers, definitely, for doing such a great work, because it's always people are seeing the outputs and trainings and gatherings and new protocols and everything, but behind the scene and very hard work is happening all the time. So congratulations, and thank you very much for sharing this very detailed information for us. And I was thinking it would be really great material for the different NGOs to have it, not just before the audit, but in the beginning of the project.
Absolutely.
Yes. The more you can do from the beginning, the better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Because as I understood you, it's very hard to remember what happened 3 or 4 years ago. If you have prepared material during the implementation of the process, it becomes much easier, because if it's a lot of partners there, then it's a huge amount of work then, and much more details, and I believe it's a huge amount of hours and stress that is happening, because
lots of nights of sleep lost.
Yeah. Yeah, it's real money for the organization, so I believe it's really stressful. Yes. Okay, I see that it was 1 hour that happened like this. So again, thank you very, very much. Like always, I would like to invite participants who are still here to write us on the ChildHub email if they want to receive a certification that they were part of this webinar. This is a really powerful tool for the organization. We will share it as soon as possible on the ChildHub for all the NGOs to use it as a real tool. I heard about the sample protocol that you are talking about it. I believe my colleague will send you an email. That's fantastic. That's really great. And I encourage also everyone who is here or will be listening to the webinar to contact you to make his/self lives much easier, I would say, in this process. And of course, like in the end, also I'm sharing a short evaluation poll. Just a second. to give us a feedback. Like always, it's very important for us to upgrade our services to you, but I believe that like always, our collaboration with the Promise project and the partner house is really great, and the participants are always very happy to receive all of your knowledge and skills that you are having and sharing with the participants.
Thank you. It's been
yeah.
absolutely invaluable to work with you to bring it to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
so much.
I'm having here from Kathleen. I will be busy then. I'm in Barnahus, Galway, so maybe.
You will, Kathleen. I'm so glad that you guys all joined. Thank you.
Yeah, I see the evaluation. Everything is fantastic. So I believe it will be really useful. So thanks everyone again. Wish you a nice rest of the day, and we'll be in touch. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.
My brain stopped working for a while, but then I came